law. I'm not here today in that capacity. At the firm, just so that people understand, we have kind of a primary contact system where one attorney is the lead contact with the town. That is not me, that's Joel Bard, and while Joel and I work together on issues all the time, the idea really here is for me to be here in kind of an independent capacity, so that the work that we would do together would be our work and not the work of Joel. Just to kind of give you a bit of background on me so that people who do not know me have a little more information. I came to Copeland and Page in 2000 from the Secretary of State's office, where I served first in the Public Records Division and then in the Elections Division. And in those capacities, I worked very closely with both municipal and state officials. And in the year 2000, felt as though it would be a good thing for me to expand my areas of practice. Obviously, when you work for the state, you work in a very narrow practice area. So I brought with me that expertise to Copeland and Page at the time, and continued to work in both the elections and public records areas, as well as open meeting, conflict of interest, municipal finance, town meeting, and slowly started expanding the areas of practice. And my elections work was a natural fit with the charter work, because the way that you adopt a charter, if you use Chapter 43B, is pursuant to a ballot question. And so I fit nicely into that slot at Copeland and Page. And so from day one working there, I was working with charter adoption, and with charters generally. Through the type of work that I do, which is administrative law, for the most part, I'm not a litigator. I don't spend my time in court. I spend my time assisting municipalities in drafting and interpreting charters, bylaws, special legislation, helping them figure out how to approach getting it onto the warrants at town meeting, what they can and can't do with respect to elections in terms of campaign finance issues, and how that impacts their ability to communicate with residents, and what the town side can do if they want to take positions on things. So all day, every day, I'm actually dealing with charters. And in that arena, I'm also dealing with what works and what doesn't work with charters. So I'm looking at provisions in Town X that is working wonderfully in Town X. I see that same provision in Town Y. It's a big issue in Town Y. And so when I go to work on a new charter, or when I'm asked, how can you help us solve this issue, Lauren, I'm able to kind of pull from all of those different experiences to try to recommend some language that actually accomplishes the goal of that community. And I think both Bernie and I have a very strong belief that it is imperative when you're working on a charter, and I know you all have the Town Government Act that you're starting with. Technically in our kind of world, that is a charter because it's establishing your form of government. I know that's not how it's referred to here. But when we're working on a document, we don't think it's easy to just pull a provision from another town or from another city and just drop it into your charter. We think you really need to consider what the implications of that might be. How that provision is playing out somewhere else isn't necessarily how it plays out for you. So in coming before you tonight, our concept of what the two of us bring to you is, you would be hiring KP Law to act as your consultant, and we would be bringing Community Paradigm on board with us for that. And so I would be assisting with the legal end of things. What can we do? What can't we do? How do we accomplish this? Can we do this under state law? And Bernie would bring his experience in the operational side and in the kind of facilitation side of things. How do you get to go? How do you manage to make these big decisions? What are the particular decision points that need to be made, and how is that best accomplished? Would you be using subcommittees? Would you be using input from other town managers, town administrators? And I know you've done a significant amount of work already, and that is exceptionally useful. And we don't know that you'd have to start all the way at square one. We don't think that would be the case. Certainly we can use the work that you've done, and it's going to be useful to you no matter what in thinking about what you need going forward. But at some point you do get past the gathering of information, or what I like to call the the learning process, and down to kind of a diagnostic, which is, all right, so here are the things we know, here's what's working, here's what's not working, what are we trying to move towards, and then thinking about some of those bigger pictures. So at the end of our proposal, we had kind of an outline of the way that we saw some of the thinking about how you would move forward. And Bernie certainly should tell you more about himself and about his thoughts as well. But our ideas was that we would be able to complement one another's areas of day-to-day expertise, where we wouldn't necessarily both be here at the same time. We would talk to the chair, what's coming up. The commission would say, oh, this is something we really think Bernie could be helpful with, and Bernie would come to a meeting or provide an opinion or advice in that aspect of things. And then when we get down to the questions that the commission has, can we do this? What does it look like if a planning board is also, doing zoning work? Or how would it best be organized in terms of the, the open space committee? Can an open space committee do planning board work? Who is the appointing authority for who? Who can confirm that? That's something that I can provide, legal information about. And that together we would be able to help you kind of move forward from the theoretical, this is what we're thinking about, to the practical, how would this actually work? And so as we got further along in the process, I would actually be able to start drafting. We would be able to say to you, okay, decision point X is this, let's figure out how to deal with this. And with Bernie's help, really try to be able to identify those actual steps that need to be taken to get from an idea to a written document.
And many of you know me, perhaps not, but I was involved, sort of presumptuous, certainly you know, but I was involved recently here in Amherst with the town manager search, working with the select board, bringing Paul Bachman on, and so I gave me an opportunity to come back to Amherst, where I attended grad school, to get involved in working with the community to find the new town manager. By way of background, to say I was a grad student here, I did my master's degree in public administration, and I have to tell you that when I was here, my thought was I was going to go off and work in state and national government, solve big picture issues up at that level. And I quickly found that when I got into the business, that local government was really where the rubber really hit the road and where things happened. So I began working with local government, hadn't really experienced much of local government prior to that. But I took a position with the town of Chelmsford as their community development director. Worked there for a couple of years and went off to do a couple other things. And I decided I was going to be this great consultant to go off and solve multiple community problems all over the place. And then had an opportunity to become the executive secretary to the town of Chelmsford, which was their administrative position at the time, back in the 1980s. I'll date myself. And it gave me an opportunity to really work at the ground level of local government in a relatively weak position administratively. But it also gave me the opportunity while I was there to start to immerse myself more in the different forms of local government. I was teaching political science over at the University of Massachusetts in Lowell, primarily focusing on, again, more on state and national types of coursework. But I found myself, as I was in Chelmsford doing that, then starting to do more teaching of state and local government and local government issues. And I had the opportunity to work in the town of Chelmsford when they changed their form of government. So I went from a open town meeting, executive secretary position, to then working in a representative town meeting, a strong town manager. I had the opportunity then to work really to form the local government. I mean, the charter, certainly there was quite a bit of work that went into the writing of the charter. Committee just like yours, that I spent quite a bit of time, and I worked hand in hand with them where I could to provide whatever guidance I could at that particular point in time. the end result was I was chosen as the town manager, but if I got to experience firsthand implementing that charter, which was really a great opportunity for me, and putting in place the practices, the systems that Chelmsford still uses to this day in terms of their budgeting, in terms of their strategic planning, their personnel practices, and so on. And then I became the city manager of Lowell back in 2006. Lowell is the fourth largest community here in Massachusetts. It has a council manager form of government where the council serves as the legislative body and the manager is the chief executive officer. Again, a different form that gave me an opportunity to experience that. I had an opportunity to, in doing that, working with a number of the mayors across the state and seeing firsthand how they dealt with their issues and the different structures that they were dealing with, and what worked and what didn't work. And then in 2014, I made the decision that my hands-on day-to-day management career was going to be at an end. And I decided that it was time to do some different things. Doing that for 30 plus years takes a toll. And it gave me a chance to really go out and start a consulting business that allows me to go back up to a higher level and working with communities on a variety of issues. So I've been doing executive recruiting here at Amherst, out of Winchendon, where I was also asked to come in and serve as an interim manager for a period of time. I helped them find a manager. I'm now working with the town of Wellesley, helping them find a new executive director. It's interesting there is Wellesley just went through a similar exercise with charter, trying to determine what they were going to do. And I've had an opportunity to work with them as we're filling that position to look at how their form of government works with what they had in mind with their charter and how we can put some ideas in place, particularly as it relates to strategic planning and more of the goal setting portion of that. And in addition to that, I've been doing work with communities on personnel systems. I'm working with the town of Long Meadow on a strategic planning and board manager relationship building exercise, a series of exercises. I'm currently working with the town of Southampton on government study. You're very fortunate you have all of you here doing all of this work. Over in Southampton, I'm doing this work by myself. But I'm meeting with all the different boards and commissions and officials and helping them kind of determine how they're going to design their form of government. Back doing some more personnel system work in Winchendon and talking to some other communities now and doing some strategic planning. Key to my approach to the recruiting and to the other work that I do is certainly key to the strategic planning efforts that I've been involved with, working with communities, is the opportunity to work with the committees, the boards, on facilitating their discussions to identify what their issues are and how we come up with solutions. Ultimately, it's not my job to come up with solutions, it's my job to float ideas out there. That's what I see as my purpose here, is working with you to help facilitate and help you come to the conclusions that you need to come to. I also am very pleased with my opportunity working with communities to work with the community. And that was, I think, very successful here in the town of Amherst. Finding the new manager is the community forums that we held before the search began, and then actually when we got to the finalists, and being able to work with the community to identify, again, the issues that are out there that they were looking for in terms of finding a manager. But that notion of civic engagement, community participation, along with my interest in various forms of government, I go out and speak on a regular basis and with the communities on their forms of government, not necessarily as a consultant, but just as someone who's interested in bending the field. I find fascinating because really when it comes down to every community is different. They have their own set of issues, their own set of values, and working with them to bring those to the fore and then developing a form of government around that, I think is fascinating work and certainly crucial to the success of the community and the way they structure the government. So that's what I would see, my expertise in terms of day-to-day operations, 30-plus years, and my expertise in different forms of government, the strengths, the weaknesses, my network of community municipal officials around the state to help bring ideas to you and work with you as you wrestle with some of these big issues. So, certainly, Mandi and I spoke about this. The idea of doing some polling, I think, is a fascinating idea to get community input. I know you've been doing that already in terms of getting community input, but if you're interested in doing some polling, I think that's a great idea in terms of putting general questions out to the public, not so much on the form of government they want, but the issues that they see, and how you can develop your form of government around those issues. So certainly that would be something I think would be helpful as well.
And let me just also add that Bernie and I have a long history of working together. We represent the town of Chelmsford, and that's where Bernie and I came across each other the first time. So we have dealt with many an issue together in exactly the same way that we're anticipating we would handle this, which is the operations and the legal go hand in hand in many, many ways. And there are times when the issues bleed over one way or the other. It's not always the legal answer isn't always the answer that matters, and sometimes the operational answer isn't always the answer that matters. But we have a very good kind of balance in understanding that. And the other thing I think that we really do share a belief in, and why we thought that this would be a good kind of pairing of experiences, that we understand that this is not the type of situation in which we come to you and say, we think this is a good plan. We think you should do X, Y, or Z, or have X, Y, Z form of government. That is not our interest. Our interest is to help you to make the decision that you want to make, and then to be able to identify those points that then turn into a charter, if that's the way that you want to go, or if you wanted to take your town government act ultimately and shift that or tweak it or add to it. That is what we would do. We would not be telling you we think this is a good plan. Do that. Or giving you a sample charter and saying, there, that's a good way to start. We really think that it's kind of the opposite. You have to start organically, take the ideals, the goals, the policies that are important to you and to the community, and then shape those into a charter rather than the other way around. So I just wanted to give you that background about both of us and our kind of perspective on the work that you have in front of you.
I do like the rendering that you look at this.
Bernie, I warned you against that. So, we're happy to talk more about the particulars of what we've written here, but we're also happy to answer any questions that you might have. However you think it's best to use the time is fine.
I'm wondering, there are extra copies of the proposal here if people have them. You have this scope of work. I'm wondering if it would be helpful for you to sort of briefly point out the key parts of the scope of work as far as what it would be like to work with you, or what kinds of things are in the scope of work that you see as important for us to know.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess that, we kind of analyze this in various parts because we think this is a big job that you have to do and you have a limited amount of time to do it. And so our thought process was the first thing that we would really need to do is to kind of sit down, take a look at everything you've done up till now. And that doesn't mean us looking at everything, but you kind of informing us and summarizing for us what you've done, how you've done it, what you think you've gotten out of the process so far, and what else you need. And part of that, as Bernie indicated, is that we really do believe that there are opportunities to engage the public in a more active way, so that not just the people that are interested in coming out to your meetings are participating, but people that maybe didn't realize that such an important thing is happening, or that didn't realize they could participate. And sometimes people don't want to come to a meeting and say what they think about things, and they prefer an opportunity to provide that feedback in other ways. So we think that that's an important part of the first portion. And also to kind of think about how your decision making is going to go. I know that we had talked about this very briefly when I was out here kind of talking about the process generally, and that is this going to be a majority rules group, or are you looking for consensus? Because at some point it's useful to decide when are we going to say we're moving forward? And so part of that really is making a decision about how that's going to work. Are we going to say, okay, if the majority wants to explore X, that's what we're going to do? Or are we going to try to convince the others to come along with us? And I think there's obviously elements of both that are important whenever you're using a group of this size, but a group of this size also requires structure. And so to kind of figure out where that line is going to be and help that as a kind of a scaffolding for the rest of the process. In part B, that is really where we kind of thought that the first thing to do is to talk about the commission and the community's idea of what a charter should be, talk about the level of detail that should be in a charter, what elements you're really looking to legislate in a permanent manner as compared to the types of elements you're looking to legislate in a more flexible manner, a bylaw versus a charter, a regulation versus a bylaw. So that is a big issue. And then this idea of what does a legislative branch look like, what does an executive branch look like, and to talk about what examples are out there, what concepts are things that you're interested in, and how to approach that evaluation or analysis.
If I could on that one, on that particular part, I think that looking back at the discussions that we had here in Amherst when we did the manager search, there were a number of form of government questions that came up during those community forums that I thought were great questions, but it really brought home that people, I think people in every community, and again, I'm doing this in other communities as well, but really I saw it here certainly, people are trying to get to the best form of government, and there are different ways to make that work. And there are different examples out there. There are certainly different examples of what the executive looks like, and what responsibilities go with the executive, which don't. How the legislative body is going to work in terms of how big it is, how it's elected. These are all questions that I think we have to really have some roundtable discussions as to when people hear a title or hear a position or hear a name, what does it mean? What a manager in one community, just use a manager for example, mayor to be put in there as well. A mayor in one community is different than a mayor in another community, because it really comes down to what authorities you want that person to have, what your goal is to have that position, what that would look like. Likewise, the legislative body, there are questions that communities grapple with all the time as to size, how they're elected. Certainly right now you have your representative town meeting allocated by precinct, which is the representative town meeting form. But if you were looking at a different type of legislative body, you'd have to really wrestle with the questions of how you do that from an electoral standpoint, as to what are the benefits of doing it by district versus doing it at large. And what does that mean? And what have communities experienced as they've gone through that? And that's all research that we need to do with you, so that, again, as Lauren pointed out, I don't think it's necessarily our task to tell you to do it this way or that way. It's why one works here, one works here, and we bring in resources to help you understand what other communities are experiencing. That I see as a key.
Yeah, and I do think it's very important, and I think in some ways, I assume when I'm having a discussion like this that you understand, when I say form of, I don't mean town manager versus mayor versus town administrator, because those titles mean very little when you're working with a charter. If you pick a form of government out of the law books, and there's 5 or 6 of them that you could choose from, they no longer are active choices, but they have setups that you could look at. In each of those options, there's varying roles of authority, there's varying roles of responsibility, there's varying roles of responsibility for appointments and for delegation of responsibilities. And so those types of things are what define what you're looking for, not what you're calling it. The biggest issue, of course, is the legislative body and what that looks like, and the executive and what that looks like ultimately. But those other issues are the decision points, and that will then in turn tell you, okay, this is really what we're looking to do and how you get there. And I always do say in this discussion, and this portion of the discussion as well, that just saying, okay, we want to do this, let's write it up. It's sometimes too early to put anything in writing, because you really need to have the concepts. We can write that after the fact to make the concepts that you've come up with into words. You don't necessarily have the words first, and then we will have a town manager form of government where the town manager has authority for X. Okay, we don't need to put it in a charter form right at that time. We can start, but it's the ideas there and the decisions. Okay, who's going to make appointments, and are those going to be confirmed by anyone? That make a difference. And we did list here some of the major decisions that we think you do need to consider, and that is Chief Executive Administrative Officer. Are they going to be elected? Are they going to be appointed? What's the degree of independent authority? Same with the legislative branch. How are you going to select them? Elected, appointed by who? Representation, town-wide, by precinct, combination, the leadership roles. Even if you said, in theory, let's say you decide, okay, we want a town council form of government. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a council president. How would that, and if you did have a council president, how would that council president be selected? So there's decisions within the decisions that need to be made, and I think as Bernie said, it's very important to be considering what you're looking for, making that decision. And one of the things that the Mass Municipal Managers Association talks about when they do presentations is, there's a sliding scale, and every community, you can take out this sliding scale, and it's not a real thing, and say, okay, if there is a confirmation requirement, well, that puts them a little bit further towards a less powerful position. If there's no confirmation, it moves them up a little bit. And it's really how those decisions are on the scale that ultimately inform what that role is going to look like. Then also the role of elected and appointed boards and committees. What positions are going to be elected? What are going to be appointed? And if they're appointed, who's going to do the appointments? We mentioned a few here, but there's others. I'm sure every municipality has its committees that are the kind of touch points or flash points. And then the role between the chief executive and the boards, committees, officials, and employees. That's very important. And also the legislative role. We do see in nearly every community a significant amount of debate about what town meeting or the town council get to do with respect to day-to-day operations. And that's something that's best considered ahead of time, rather than, if you create a council or something, all of a sudden, there's consideration of, well, how does that group interact with employees? Or if you have a representative town meeting, does representative town meeting get to weigh in on which decisions of the executive? So those types of things, they're fluid answers and they're important to consider. And then the real operational side of things, the day-to-day budgeting, responsibility for executing contracts, personnel issues, who resolves them, how do they resolve them, who does licensing, how do we interact with the community, especially in a community like this one where you have significant issues that go beyond what might be in a community without universities right within your four corners, and what the relationship is with year-round residents versus students and people that are here on a temporary basis. So those discussions really would be ongoing. They look as